Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Ari and today I'm sharing my best of the best home decor DIY project of 2022. I have compiled a list of 10 different projects which I personally loved the most this year, and I really hope that you will love each and every one as well. The first project is a pottery barn knockoff. This is a numbers canvas. It's from old stock and not being sold anymore. The first thing to do is to print and cut out the prints. I have here a canvas which is a 3 size. Since the original print is vintage one, I'm edging the printouts using instant coffee. I'm adding a little water to a spoonful of instant coffee and tinting the white areas on the printout till I get the desired shade. Now I'm going to cut out the print. To cover the entire canvas, I have to cut as many as 6 pieces from A4 sheets because of the margins. I have prepared 2 options for printing for you, a smaller one to fit a canvas of A4 size and a larger one to fit A3 size like mine. All the links are in the description box as usual. Next you will need a canvas. I have here a used one. So first I'm covering the canvas generously with white glue so that the entire surface is covered. You can also use Mod Podge here. And I'm attaching the prints so that all the seams come together and there are no wrinkles. After that, I'm applying more glue on the paper. You'll need quite a lot. The paper should be soaked with glue, and I begin by kind of rubbing the glue into the surface. In the video, this is not very visible, but when you rub it with effort, the texture of the canvas will appear on the surface. Also, if you rub it in one place for a long time, the black ink from the printout will start to wear off a little, which will add a vintage feeling to the work. After all the paper is ground in and you like the look, leave the whole thing to dry. The canvas will stretch a little and the surface will be nice and smooth. After everything dries well, all that is left is to cover small flaws. In some places the paper seams got visible a little, so I'm painting them black. And I'm also painting the edges of the canvas black to finish the work. I'm also adding an ivory shade to the numbers here and there, but this is optional. As you can see, this is a super simple project and you can make any picture or photo on canvas like this. This would be a great focal point for a small room with its graphic nature to add structure but a modern twist on a rustic surface. The second project, which I really love, is a Dollar Tree makeover of ceramic Christmas houses. This was a Christmas collection in our local Dollar Tree. First, I'm priming the houses using bonding primer, same one I used before. I'm painting the entire houses except for the roofs because I'll glue extra roofs onto them. All in all, the houses were nice as they are, but alas, the doors of the houses are colored and the edges of the roofs will be visible from under the new ones, so I'll have to paint as I need plain white houses for my makeover. After the primer is completely dry, I'm painting the houses, as I already said, white. Here I've had to do as many as 3 layers. I'm applying the last coat with a sponge so that no brush marks are visible and the surface get a little texture. And in the end, as usual, I'm sealing them with a matte varnish. I want to make wooden roofs for the houses. I'm using thin slats for making the roofs. By the way, in the US, in Dollar Tree stores, there are balsa wood boards for crafting. They'll be great for this purpose. Unfortunately, ours don't hold such stuff, so I'll assemble the roofs out of several slats. Where
there is a pipe on the roof, a slot should be made in the roof. So I'm measuring and cutting off a piece of slat that will go above the pipe. And then I'm cutting a piece for below the pipe just the same way. I'm sanding these pieces so that everything fits nicely. The pipe at the base is thicker than at the top, so I have to remove the wood a little from the inside. The second half of the roof is solid without any slots. After all the slats are cut, I'm assembling the two halves of the roof using white glue and leave them to dry well. In the same way, I'm making the roofs for all the 4 houses. Depending on the location on the pipe, the shape will be a little bit different, but I think the principle is quite clear. I'm sanding the finished halves, surrounding all the edges and corners, and in the upper part where the roof ridge will be, I'm sanding the parts harder, making angled edge, so that they fit each other more or less snugly. After that, I'm staining the roofs. Here again I'm using water-based stain in oak, like this shade really much. I'm also giving them 2 coats to get a nice and rich shade. Finally, after drying, I'm attaching the finished roofs to the houses. I'm using mounting glue here, but any glue that is good for wood and ceramic will do here. I resisted the desire to buy these houses for quite some time because I filmed a similar makeover a year ago, I think. I just repainted the houses then, but at one moment I came up with the idea of making wooden roofs and I couldn't resist, especially since these houses were selling with a good discount after Christmas. I think they are so nice and sleek and kind of minimalistic now, and it's a great idea to turn Christmas decorations into all year round decorations, isn't it?
Actually, I love Dollar Tree makeovers very much, and the next project I'll share today is also a Dollar Tree makeover. I bought this oval metal planter at a local Dollar Tree and I've decided to decorate it with stenciling. First, I'm fixing the stencil on the planter's side with masking tape. Then I'm applying a thin layer of acrylic wood filler on the stencil with a palette knife. Here I've tried to make the layer as even as possible. By the way, this stencil is from AliExpress. I'll leave the link for similar options in the description box as usual. After that, I'm removing the stencil while the wood filler is still wet and leaving the raised pattern to dry well. After drying, I'm sanding the stenciling slightly to remove sharp edges if any, and then I'm priming the entire planter with a bonding primer. After the primer has dried, I'm painting the planter light blue. I'm giving it 2 layers for a good coverage. I'm using acrylic paint and you can use chalk paint as well, then you won't need a primer.
Next, I'm painting the upper edge of the planter black using a sponge, imitating the edging on enamel coating. I'm also making several black spots on the bottom as if the enamel has peeled off here. Then I'm dry brushing the surface cream to make the raised pattern stand out a little. And finally, I'm sealing the planter with clear wax. These planters have a nice shape, but the painting is not so nice. You can also make over a round bucket or even a loaf pan, which Dollar Tree stores also have, and you can actually make a whole set of tin buckets and planters like this in the same color. My next makeover will be of these cute chicks. I've bought one of them last year, and this season our local Dollar Tree has these golden chicks, and I've decided that they would make a great couple. First, as usual, I'm priming the chicks. I'm using a leftover primer after my latest kitchen repainting. Any bonding primer will do here, or you can just use chalk paints and then you won't need to prime. After that, I'll paint the chicks. The bigger one will be gray. And I'm making the little one bright red. I'm giving them 2 layers of paint to have nice and even color. I really like the shape of these chicks. By the way, you can make similar figures on your own using papier-mâché technique and a latex balloon. The shape is very simple actually, and I think it's easy to make. I'm painting scallops and beaks beige. And after that, I'll draw polka dots. To do this, I'm using a pencil with an eraser on the end. I've made it slightly smaller using a pencil sharpener, and then I'm dipping this impromptu stamp into the paint. And here we go. In this way, you'll get polka dots that are almost unpainted inside. This is rather rings. You can leave them as they are. They look quite cute. Also, you can paint them later with a brush. When you have a trace trim, painting the middle is very quick and easy since not much accuracy is needed. All that is left is to make tails. I'm using jute twine for this, just making several loops on my fingers and cutting them. Then I'm tying all the twine pieces together and then wrapping them into more twine to make a thickening at the end. And then I'm hot gluing the tail onto the chick. I'm also making the tail for the second cheek. Here I'm hot gluing the twine ends directly onto the base because this cheek has a pointed tail, and then I'm wrapping the base of the tail in twine right on the figure. And in the end, I'm sealing the cheeks using wax. I really like its finish. I'm applying the wax with a brush and then rubbing it with a cloth to remove the excess. I think the chicks are adorable. I came across their similar figures on Pinterest, and since then I wanted to DIY them, and thanks to the similar shape, these two chicks make a great set, although they were bought in different years. I also think they look much more organic after repainting, especially the one that had a golden scallop. It looked a little bit strange with gold to me.
The next project, which I really love and which I still use quite a lot, is an Ikea Frosta stool makeover.
This one is very old and it has seen better days. We've painted something on it and the varnish is chipping off because it used to sit in a garage, so the surface looks really bad, but it is still sturdy and I've decided to bring it back to life. I'm going to repaint it using my homemade chalk paint. I'm mixing 1 part white clay with 1 part water to get rid of any lumps, and then I'm adding 3 parts paint. I'm going to make denim imitation, so I'm using a light blue color. By the way, it's better to mix the paint in one container and then pour it into the other one to mix better. I'm painting the stool right away, no primer. I've tasted this recipe quite a lot and it holds well like this. The first layer is quite transparent and in fact it works like a primer here. Once the first layer is dry, I'm applying the second one, and here I'm making short strokes with a brush in 2 directions, lengthwise and across, to get a slightly checkered texture. As you remember, I'm trying to imitate denim, so I'm making a kind of fabric-like texture. Next, I've added white acrylic to the base color to get a lighter shade, and I'm dry brushing the whole surface with this color. At first, I've tried to make long strokes in 2 directions, but in fact dry brushing reveals the texture well, so this hasn't even been necessary. It looks very similar to denim, just like I wanted. I'm working out the legs and the edge of the seat with short cross strokes, and then I'm blending these strokes along. It looks like a jeans seam. After that, I'm applying a self-adhesive stencil over the seat. This is a Barcelona airport custom stamp. I'm making this stool for my son's bedroom. He studies Spanish and I've also made a dresser with Spanish places of interest painted over, so this stool kind of continues this Spanish theme, but of course any other stamp would do here, or even no stamp at all. And then I'm applying light blue paint over the stencil with a sponge. Here I'm using the same lighter shade that I've already used for dry brushing. The best part of the work is removing the stencil. It is almost like removing a masking tape, a very pleasant feeling. To make the denim imitation even more real, I'm adding stitching. I'm drawing it with a bronze contour paint and it looks just like denim stitching. I'm making the stitching along the edge of the seat, also making a small cross stitching on the seat edge and along the edges of the leg. In order to highlight the stamp on the seat a little, I'm attaching the stencil edge here again. You can use masking tape here and dry brushing the edge with the darker shade of blue around the future pocket. And after the paint has dried, I'm attaching the stencil edge from the other side and dry brushing the inside of the pocket with the lighter shade. And I'm adding the stitching along the perimeter of the pocket. Here I'm using a ruler to keep it even. I'm making a double line, just like on real jeans. By the way, you can do without stenciling the seat here and just draw a jeans pocket like on real jeans and make decorative stitching on it. It will look very cool. All that is left is to seal everything with varnish. Since this is the stool, I didn't want to use wax here because varnish holds better than wax, so I'm sealing it with matte acrylic varnish. The stool turned out to be like new. I really love how it looks now. By the way, you can also upholster the seat with real denim and make it soft. It will look great too. Thanks to using chalk paint, I've been able to create a fabric texture which I really like, and the stitching really adds to the overall look.
I love making lanterns. I love using them for home or garden decor. So of course today's video will contain some DIYs of lanterns. And the first one I'll share today is a beaded lantern which I made inspired by a very beautiful lantern found on Pinterest.
As a base for this lantern, I'm using a wooden plate again. You can also use any wooden circle. And I'm using a large glass jar. I'm dividing the plate into 6 parts in order to arrange the lantern supports evenly. And I'm drilling the holes according to the marks using a drill bit size to fit the wire diameter which I'll use for the supports. I'm making a test support out of wire, shaping it as I like, and then I'll draw a template on paper using this support. Then I'm cutting 5 more pieces of wire for supports, and I'm bending them according to the template so that all the supports have the same shape. I have a fairly thick wire, it holds its shape well, but it can be hard to bend it by bare hands, so I'm helping myself with pliers. After all the supports are ready, I'm sticking them into the wooden base and bending the wire tips on the inside so that the supports hold well in place. I'll fix them with hot glue a bit later. And now I'll fill the supports. For this I'm using 14mm wooden beads. They have a large hole and they fit wire supports perfectly. It turned out that the upper band tip, which I made according to the template, wouldn't allow me to put the beads on, so I had to unband it, and after all the beads were put on, I bent it back. My lantern is quite large and it took as much as 22 beads for each support. And I have to tell you, stringing the beads onto the supports is really satisfying. After that, I'll make the top of the lantern. To do this, I'm using wooden rings. These are actually knitted bag handle bases. I'll leave the link for some options you may use, but of course you can cut it out yourself. I'm dividing one of the rings into 6 parts and drilling the holes for wire supports. I'm placing the ring onto the supports and bending the wire tips. And now I'm fixing the supports on the bottom with hot glue so that nothing wiggles. Next, I'm bending a wire ring the size of the wooden one. I've chosen the length of the wire to have about an inch overlap on the ring. And I'm stringing the beads on the wire ring. At the very end, I'm threading the second tip of the wire into the first 2 beads. It enters the hole with great difficulty and this fixes the ring tightly. Then I thought that I needed to sand off the duct edge of the wooden ring so that the color matches the whole lantern. At this point, I've decided that 6 supports are still not enough. I want more. So I'm taking out the jar and marking the places for installing additional supports between the existing ones. I'm drilling the holes both in the base and in the upper ring. and I'm installing wire supports. I've made them using the same template as for the first ones. Before installing the last support, I'm returning the jar back to place. And finally, I'm stringing the beads on these additional supports. And then I'm threading the tips of the supports into the upper ring and bending them in. Now I'll finish the top. I'm hot gluing the beaded ring onto the wooden ring. This will be the decoration, and at the same time the beads hide the wire support tips. And I'm hot gluing the second wooden ring on top. As you remember, I had 2 of them in the set. I've decided to stain the lantern in order to show off the wood texture better. I've used my favorite wooden stain in oak color. It would probably be more convenient to stain all the parts of the lantern before assembly. It would be much easier, I think, but this idea occurred to me only after the lantern was ready. The original lantern is much lighter, so first I thought I'd leave it as it was, but after it was done I realized the beads look almost white and I wanted a more boho, more aged look, so I'm staining it only now. After the stain has dried, I'm sealing it with white wax. I'm trying to recreate these delicate highlights that the original lantern I've shown you has. Just a little bit left. In order to hide the ugly hot glue streaks and wire on the inside of the top, I'm hot gluing jute rope here. I'm also hot gluing the jar to the base so that it won't wiggle. And all that is left is to make a handle. I'm using the same jute rope that I decorated the top with. I'm making a loop through the top, tying the rope to it, and then making several weaves to hide the knot and hot gluing the rope tip. To be honest, I absolutely love the result. This lantern is very large, as I wanted it to be, and I think it will look great on my patio. I really like how the bead supports look, and I also think it turned out very similar to the original one from the photo. What do you think?
The next DIY is a vase, and this was a thrift lip makeover.
Start with this enameled canister. It had been used for storing strawberry jam. And I'm going to make a vase or a decorative vessel out of it. The first thing I'm doing is giving it a good wash in a dishwashing machine and then priming it. Here a primer suitable for metal is needed, and I'm using a leftover primer I have from repainting my mom's kitchen. This is a bonding primer, so I'll use it for all of the makeovers today. I've decided to add some raised stenciling here. I'm attaching a stencil to the canister. It turned out to be too big, so I'm cutting the stencil in half. I'm fixing it with masking tape so that nothing moves. After that, I'm applying a thin layer of wood filler over the stencil. You want to have quite a thin layer here, just about 1 millimeter over the surface. And I'm trying to make it as even as possible. After all the stencil is filled, I'm removing it right away. I'm doing this very carefully in order not to smudge the pattern. I let it dry and then I'm attaching the stencil again to finish the pattern on the other side of the canister. The pattern almost matched in the end. I was lucky. After everything dries well, I'm giving it a light sand to remove any sharp tips along the edges of the pattern and to smooth everything out a bit. I'm dusting the surface and it's now ready for painting. I've decided to give this vessel faux zinc look. I have already shown you this technique many times. I love it very much. It's especially good for old metal items because you know they are made of real metal, so no one can tell this zinc surface is not real. To do it, first I'm painting the whole thing grey. I'm waiting for it to dry well, and after this I'll be using another grey, which is a couple of shades lighter. I'm thinning it a little with water, then I'm crumpling a wet paper towel and I'm applying the paint onto the canister surface using the towel with blotting movements. Because there's so much water, the paint spreads a little and I get blurring uneven spots of light grey. I'm waiting again for it to dry completely, and this time I'll take another grey color, which is a couple of shades darker than the original one. By the way, you can mix all these colors by yourself simply by adding different amounts of black and white paint. And I'm repeating all these steps again, thinning the paint, applying it with a wet crumpled towel and leaving it to dry. For the final layer, I'll use silver paint and repeat everything one more time. After this last layer, the surface becomes almost indistinguishable from a real old zinc one. To make it yet more realistic looking, I'm adding rusty brown color in places to add this rustic vintage feeling. In order to make the raised part stand out a little, I'm also dry brushing it brown. And in the end, I'm sealing it with a satin sealer. The canister looks like a real vintage thing now, and any flower arrangement will look great here. If you repaint a wider container or vessel like this, it would make an excellent planter. Such planters look especially good in a garden arrangement. The only thing is that you'll need to seal it with a weather-resistant sealer then.
The next project, which I love very much, is another thrift flip makeover, and here I used a round cotton board to make a nice cake stand.
I also found a round board of similar size. I don't even know what it was for, but it's just the right diameter to make a rotating stand out of this. First of all, the boards need to be properly sanded. The cotton board is made of some kind of hard wood, so it has been quite hard work to sand it, and another challenge has been to clean the groove and the edge around the perimeter. I've worked this over with a sander and then I've sanded it by hand to remove all that the sander couldn't do. I'm wiping the dust with a damp cloth. I need to remove this rectangular piece on the wrong side of the round board. It was glued and doweled. Fortunately for me, the glue has peeled off from time and I'm detaching this piece easily simply by prying it with a knife. I've decided to decorate the front side with a vintage lettering. As usual, my favorite website, the Graphics Fairy, came to my rescue. I've printed a mirror image on a laser printer and I'm cutting it out and securing it with masking tape. I'm going to transfer the image using a nail polish remover. You want to use the one with acetone in it. I'm applying the remover to the wrong side of the print and pressing it with a spatula with force to transfer the ink to the wood. I'm staining the finished board using water-based stain in an oak color. To make the rotating stand, I'll be using this Lazy Susan part. In fact, it's a large bearing plate. I'm marking where the Lazy Susan bearing plate is going to be fixed on the lower circle and drilling holes according to these marks. I'm using a 8mm drill bit so that later I'll be able to put the screw-in bit into the hole. I'm installing the bearing plate on the lower board so that the drilled holes are placed between the holes on the bearing plate, and I'm fastening the bearing plate to the lower board. I'm turning the upper half of the bearing plate so that the holes on the upper part come over the drilled holes. Then I'm placing the bottom wooden board upside down. Through the drilled holes, the bearing plate holes will be visible, and I'm fastening the bearing plate to the second wooden board through these holes. I've decided I want the lazy Susan to sit on a stand, and I've collected a variety of old saucers and bowls. I'm choosing several of them to assemble the stand. I'm using an epoxy putty stick to assemble the stand. The two components are of different colors, and you are to knead them well until you get a uniform color. Then I'm applying the putty along the contour of the saucer and attaching it to the largest plate. I'm attaching two small jam bowls together, bottom to bottom. And then I'm attaching the resulting leg to the base out of two saucers. I'm removing all the excess putty that has come out with a sharp knife. After the epoxy putty has set, I'll paint the stand. I'm priming it with the adhesive primer, the same I used before. And then I'm painting it black with acrylic paint. I've used a sponge here, and I've got a nice texture similar to cast iron. After drying, I'm sealing it with a matte varnish. Finally, I'll attach the stand to the wooden part. I've run out of epoxy putty here, and so I'm using cold welding to do this. This is how an old cotton board and a pile of bowls and plates has turned into a beautiful farmhouse-style lazy Susan. You can serve a cake or cheese or fruits on it. It's very convenient to use for serving because it rotates, and I really like how it looks on its own. I use it a lot as a base for seasonal arrangements.
The next project, which I actually think is quite an underestimate one because it looks really unique and unusual, is bookends made out of wooden smoke chips.
Here you will also need a base. I'm using foam eggs, but you can actually DIY them as well, for example out of foil. To make the eggs stand up, I'm cutting off the bottoms with a box knife. After that, I'm painting the eggs dark brown, just as I did with the photo frame. After that, I'll pick the chips I'm gonna need for this. I'll be making bookends with pineapples. I found a picture of similar ones made of driftwood on Pinterest. They are sold out, so I don't know where they're from. It was just a picture and I fell in love with them, and I just had to DIY them for me. So what I need is the chips for making pineapple leaves, and so I'm picking long and pointed ones as well as all kinds of irregularly shaped chips to cover the fruits themselves. After I've picked the chips, I'll start to turn the eggs into pineapples. First, I'm making the tops. To do this, I'm hot gluing long pointed chips vertically onto the egg tops to make something similar to bunches of leaves. You can make these tops more fluffy or very short. I like to have them thicker, so I'm making bigger bundles. I'm attaching the longest chips to the center, then closer to the edges I'm adding those that are lower and wider, and then I'm hot gluing the smallest ones into the gaps in between so that the bundle looks dense and the base is not seen through anywhere. After the top bundles of leaves are ready, I begin covering the base. For the first row, I'm using the smallest chips of the most beautiful shapes I found, and I'm hiding the place of attachment of the top bundle under them, as I don't want hot glue to be visible anywhere. After that, I'm attaching the second row. Here I'm making a shift already, placing the chips like scales, and I'm attaching the chips on the lower edge only to make them stick out like scales on a pine cone. At this point, it's time to remember that the chips often have oblique cuts, and it's very convenient to hot glue them standing on this oblique edge so that they fit snugly and nicely to the base. I'm attaching the third row, making a shift again, trying to ensure that the scales of the next row are located at the joints of the scales of the previous row. So, in general, I'm placing all the chips like tiles or fish scales. For the upper part of the pineapples, I'm picking up medium-sized pieces, and also I'm picking the chips that have uneven edges and not just straight cuts. Well, at least trying to use most of the chips of this shape. So you have to take your time to pick the right chips, but I promise you the result will definitely please you. Starting from about the middle, I began to pick larger pieces for scales. Yeah, I forgot to tell you, I'm making both pineapples at once so that it won't happen that I use up all of the chips of the right size and shape for the first pineapple and have nothing left for the second one. I'm finishing the pineapples with the largest chips, and due to the shape of the base at the very bottom, the chips sit almost parallel to the table surface. This covers the base just perfectly, so the finished pineapples look very nice and neat, and you would never think that they are made from wooden chips for a barbecue. Next, I'll make the actual bookends. My hub has cut several pieces from a wooden board for me. This is birch wood, they are quite thick and heavy and will hold books well. I'm assembling the parts together at right angles using wood glue. If you would rather not cut anything, you can also assemble the bookends out of tumbling tower blocks from Dollar Tree, just gluing several blocks together. After drying, I have kind of wooden brackets, and I'm staining them with a water-based stain in oak to fit the color of the chips. And the last thing to do is to hot glue the pineapples onto the bookends. I have to say, it's amazing. I love the way the chip-covered pineapples look. The shape just goes so well for showing off the chip's texture, and they actually look like an item from a high-end store. I think this is going to be one of my favorite projects ever.
I've promised more lanterns to you, and here is another one which I made using Dollar Tree tumbling tower blocks. It looks gorgeous, and I think actually this is one of the best lanterns I've ever made.
First, I'm connecting the blocks in pairs, making bars. I'll need as many as 32 parts like this. Then I'll use photo frames. I have here untreated frames, and you want to remove glass and glass holders from them. Then I'm attaching the bar parts into the two of the frames. I'm lucky to have them fit right into the space for the glass. To assemble the lantern body, I'm connecting the frames together using masking tape so that they do not fall apart. After that, I'm attaching two more bar parts, and I'm placing the edges onto the edges of first two bars, making a square base. I I let the base dry so as not to be afraid to move it around, and then I'm continuing attaching the bars like shown before until I fill the frames up to the top. By the way, here you can also use a wooden slat and cut it to fit the frames and not use tumbling blocks at all. While the sides are getting dry, I'll make the bottom. I'm using 12 blocks for this and making a square part out of them. And I'm making a square pattern here like on a garden wooden flooring. I'm adding the legs to the finished bottom. These are 2 long bars. And finally, I'm attaching the lantern sides to the bottom. Then I'll make the top. This time I'm going to use papier-mâché technique since the shape will be a little bit curved. I'm cutting 4 parts out of corrugated cardboard. You want to place them so that the corrugation runs parallel to the bottom side of the part. I'm shaping the finished part with a stick. You want to make them slightly curved. And I'm assembling the parts using masking tape. I'm also adding a strip of cardboard to the top as a handle. Then I'm covering the top with pieces of newspaper soaked in white glue. I've covered the top both inside and outside with 2 or 3 layers of newspapers, and after drying I've covered it with another layer of white glue. By the way, if you've got a fruit dryer, such things dry superbly in it. Just about 10 minutes and you are done. I'm also covering the finished lid with a thin layer of putty to even out the surface. You can use texture paste here as well, or make your own out of white glue, baking soda and acrylic paint. I've posted a video with this recipe a couple of days earlier. I've decided to make a white frame on the top to make it look more interesting. Here I've had to saw, but as you can see I've managed with a small jigsaw. I'm shortening 2 blocks by a third, and after that I'm assembling a square frame out of 8 normal and 2 short blocks. I let the frame dry and attaching to the finished top. To reinforce the structure, after drying I'm applying hot glue inside, filling the gap between the frame and the top with glue. Then I'll paint the thing. I'm staining the base of the lantern. Here I'm using very thin briar smoke stain. Love its grayish-brown shade. This is an oil-based stain. I'm applying it with a brush and then wiping off the excess with a cloth. By the way, I strongly advise you not to do like I did. The finished body has a lot of hard-to-reach corners that are difficult to get to, so if you decide to make this, stain all the bars and frames in advance before gluing together. This will save you a lot of time. I'm staining the lantern body both inside and outside. I'm also staining the square frame on the top, and then I'm painting the top itself dark gray. After the paint dries well, I'm dry brushing the top with white to highlight the edges a bit and make the color more interesting. And finally, I'm sealing the lantern with a matte varnish. All that is left is to attach the small hinges for the top, and you are done. This is another lantern in my collection. I think I have already made 5 or 6 different DIY lanterns. I really like its unusual base, looking like shutters on the windows. I was inspired by pottery-born lanterns when making this one. Of course, as with most wooden lanterns, you cannot use real candles inside, but it looks great with an electric candle or a fairy lights inside.
Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give this video a thumbs up, as this really helps my channel out. And also please let me know in the comments below if you saw your favorite project from this year, or maybe if you met a new favorite. Thanks for being here and hope to see you in my next one. Bye!